If it's brown, lay down. If it's black, fight back. If it's white, say goodnight. Imagine you're on an island surrounded by polar bears, and the people who came with you to that island died. So it's just you now with a bunch of deadly white polar bears. That was a reality for Ada Blackjack in 1923 on Wrangel Island, the breeding ground of polar bears. Who is Ada Blackjack, and how did she get here? Ada was an Iñupiat seamstress and cook living in Nome, Alaska. She was abandoned by her husband, and she was left with her only surviving son, Bennett. Unfortunately, Bennett suffered from tuberculosis, and Ada couldn't afford treatment for him. So she had to live through a mother's worst nightmare. She had to leave Bennett in an orphanage so she could search for work. That's really sad. Around the same time, the Wrangel Island expedition members were looking to hire Inuit people, but no one was willing to go to Wrangel Island, except for Ada Blackjack. She desperately needed the money. What she didn't know is that she was going on a fool's errand. The expedition setup was exploitative at best, reckless at worst, and doomed to fail because of one man who orchestrated it. His name is Viljamur Stephenson, and you can boo him. Please boo him. So this guy is something else. Fascinated by polar expeditions and the Inuit way of life, he lived among them, studying their survival and hunting methods. But he always observed them with an air of superiority and documented their ways in his book called My Life with the Eskimo, and he repeatedly called them primitive. Yes, big boo. After eating their food, wearing their clothes, and benefiting from their hospitality, he simply claimed white men could do it better. Yes, yeah. So driven by hubris, he set out to prove himself through a series of expeditions. The first time, it was a disaster. In 1913, he led the Canadian Arctic expedition, boarding the Karluk ship, convinced he mastered Arctic survival. But maps, yes. As soon as the Karluk ship was strapped in ice, Stephenson abandoned it. He took a few dogs, a few men, and he said, "I'm gonna go hunt caribou!" And he never went back to the ship and to the crew. Nearly half the crew died. After the Karluk sank, survivors took shelter on a brutal, unforgiving island. On that island, some starved, some froze, and some died of disease. Survivors had to be rescued from this deadly island. Any guesses to which island this was? That's right, Wrangel Island. This was a warning. Wrangel Island is not a place you live in. It's a place you endure and hope to be rescued from. But instead of learning from the Karluk disaster, Stephenson blamed the victims for their incompetence and continued spreading delusional ideas. He even went on to publish a book after the Karluk disaster called The Friendly Arctic. And there in that book, he went on to say, given a healthy body and cheerful disposition, a family can now survive and live at the North Pole as comfortable as it can in Hawaii. By the way, that's Stephenson in Hawaii. Yes. Despite the lives lost in Karluk, he doubled down and launched the Wrangel Island expedition of 1921. He recruited 4 men and told them that the expedition was fully funded. But when the men asked for cash to buy supplies, Stephenson just told them the funds weren't available. Apparently the money existed, just not in Alaska, where it mattered, because that was the launch point of the expedition. So the men had to borrow money from family just to buy supplies for the expedition. And Stephenson even had the gall to tell them not to spend that money on too much supplies or too many supplies because they were to rely on the game of the island. He didn't... Also, this man is something else because he didn't pay their wages up front in cash. Do you know what he gave them instead? He gave them shares. He gave them... Yeah. He gave them shares from his Arctic Exploration and Development Company. And the men didn't protest either. They fully bought into the scheme. They bought additional shares. One even went as far as going into debt because he spent all his expedition wages into buying more shares on an expedition that would finish them. These men would really thrive in the AI startup ecosystem. Indigenous hunters warned that the game was scarce, but Stephenson refused to heed their advice. He simply wrote that the fact that the Eskimos said so, that there would be scarce game, meant little to him. And he then proceeded to send these men on this poorly funded, dangerous expedition on this deadly island. These men who went to be explorers for the glory of it, and Ada Blackjack, who went because she wanted to save her son. So they set sail in September 1921. Ada was surrounded by one competent kitty cat. The cat's name is Vic, very cute cat, and 4 incompetent fools. So this is a fun story. One unfortunate day, 2 of the men came face to face with a polar bear when they were eating brunch or breakfast in their tents. They left their guns outside the tent, completely out of their reach. So when the polar bear was there, the only thing they could do was throw forks and spoons at it. I'm so glad someone called this art. I did draw it myself. And threw burning wood at it. And somehow, the bear backed off. So when one of them finally snuck outside to grab his rifle so he could shoot at it for game, it was too frozen to work. Completely useless. That is how, this is rule 101, is you have to keep the guns in sight, close to you at all times, right? In this dangerous island, but no. Their incompetence wasn't the worst of it all. They were cruel to Ada. They called her names, complained she didn't work hard enough. They withheld food as punishment. Sometimes made her sleep outside in the cold sometimes. This is one of her journal entries, and you can see how exhausted she is. Ada was underpaid, starved, and stranded on an island with something far worse than polar bears, these stupid, stupid men. And then, bears were better, in my opinion. And then her diary entry started looking like this. And this is the summer of 1923, 2 years in the expedition. She talks of sunshine and rest days. And then in this one, she's going on a picnic by herself in Wrangel Island, catching eggs and making herself some tea and some lunch. What could have happened? All the men died. It was only Ada and Vic the cat on Wrangel Island. So proof that cat ladies can thrive on a deadly island. So let's rewind a little though. How did they die? In 1922, 1 year into the expedition, Stephenson had promised that a relief ship would arrive with people to check on them and with additional food supplies. That ship never arrived. Why? Stephenson's shares could probably not pay for that relief ship. So no country wanted to fund this expedition at all. No one wanted to claim Wrangel Island. Even Britain, who would jump at the opportunity to colonize anything, didn't want Wrangel Island. Canada and America remained indifferent and diplomatic. No one wanted to piss the Soviet Union off. So, with dwindling supplies, no relief ship that arrived, the men and Ada were starving. And because of that, 3 of the men had to set out in the ice, head to the mainland seeking help. This was in January 1923, a year and a half into the expedition. These men were never found. Meanwhile, Ada was left behind with one man, Lorne Knight, who was dying from scurvy. Suddenly, the work of 4 men fell on Ada Blackjack. See, she'd been hired as a seamstress and cook, and she had no hunting and survival skills. But now she had to hunt, she had to chop wood, she had to shoot, teach herself how to do all of that, and worse, nurse and take care of a dying man who only quarreled with her. Basically, put up with this bullshit. Yeah. She set traps for foxes, she practiced shooting, she was a hard worker, she hunted game, and she brought ducks, foxes, seals, geese, seagulls. And then one day, Ada had to confront her worst fear of the polar bear. Not 1, but 2 polar bears were hovering outside their tent door. Thank you. I feel like Michelangelo. Choosing to brave her fears, Ada grabbed Knight's rifle, tore the tent entrance open. She wasn't throwing forks and spoons, you guys. She took that rifle and she fired shots, and the bears ran away, frightened. But she was ambitious. She didn't want them to run away. She was like, I can hunt these bitches. As Ada grew stronger in her hunting and survival skills, Knight grew weaker, despite Ada giving him the lion's share of fresh meat. He died in June 1923, 6 months later, leaving Ada to herself, alone, to thrive. Now, Ada was alone on the island for 3 months. She continued to hunt, knit. She even taught herself photography and photographed birds, went on picnics, explored the land, and lived amongst polar bears. And I wouldn't be surprised if the polar bears were intimidated by her and didn't want to go hunt, threaten her again. So they all lived in harmony in Wrangel Island. A rescue ship was eventually sent to escort Ada Blackjack and Vic, the cat, to Nome in September 1923. Ada returned home as the sole survivor of the Wrangel Island expedition, and she became a media sensation. She was called the female Robinson Crusoe, and she was brilliant. She had survived the Arctic, the polar bears, the cruelty of her companions, and Stephenson. But it wasn't enough to save Bennett. Yeah. The treatments failed, and Bennett passed away. Ada chose to live a quiet life away from the glory of it all. She moved to Seattle, she remarried, she had another son, and she lived on like the badass that she is. So, there we have it. We have the men who went to Wrangel Island for the glory of it and died. And Ada Blackjack, who went to Wrangel Island to survive and thrived. So today, let's toast to Ada Blackjack. Ada may have gone on a fool's errand driven by one man's hubris, but she stands as proof that the Inuit were right all along, that Wrangel Island was a dangerous place for everyone else, but not for Ada Blackjack and Vic.